Hey everyone, welcome to the last lecture, week 8 for Intro to Policing. So this week we're talking about unique populations in policing. This is going to be a later video, much like the previous week was, simply because, well, number one, there's a final exam this week, and number two, we're kind of just filling in some gaps and covering some things that we've talked about a little bit, but just kind of filling out our general understanding and knowledge base. So, anyway, just wanted to say that before we dive in. So, really, as I've already kind of jumped in, but unique populations, what I'm talking about in in corrections, we talk about the fact that there are different types of people who are incarcerated. When we talk about juvenile justice, we talk about, what are juveniles and the different groups that you have there. In policing, because policing deals with community members, this means that there is a very wide grouping of people that are engaged by the police. And so, truly understanding the unique populations in policing, I'm not saying that there are unique populations within police departments. There are, but what I'm talking about is since they engage with the general community, there are some key individuals, and I don't mean individuals, but I mean sorry, I'm struggling with my words here because it's difficult to talk about this in the most neutral way possible. Within the realm of policing, because they deal with the general community, they deal with a lot of different people of a lot of different backgrounds. And this means that they engage with very unique populations. And so that's what we're talking about. So, going to that first one, the first big group that I want to talk about today briefly is the mentally ill and the neurodivergent individuals. So, first off, mentally ill. This is people who suffer from some kind of mental illness or anything of that nature. Obviously, if you know anything about psychology or mental health, you know that mental illness is a vast ranging thing. Saying mentally ill is not really identifying a group. It's a wide spectrum. And one of the things that is talked about in the text itself is when you engage with the idea of working with the mentally ill within a community of policing, you're also dealing with other factors. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But I wanted to emphasize that mentally ill typically means someone who suffers from some sort of mental illness. This can be diagnosed depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder, all these types of things. That's the mentally ill. And I want to emphasize that our text doesn't do it, and I very specifically chose these words intentionally. So, neurodivergent individuals, for those of you who haven't heard the term before or have no idea what I'm talking about, as we've learned more about psychology and we've learned more about individuals and how our brains work and things of that nature, we've discovered that there are different ways that people's brains operate. And I want to emphasize to all of you that just because someone thinks differently doesn't mean that they're mentally ill. And that's why I say it's not just mentally ill, it's neurodivergent. I use this term because this is a mostly accepted term to speak about people who might have different ways that their brain works. In particular, thinking about ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum disorder. These people are put under the category of neurodivergent. And so, really, what it means is neurodivergent is people who deviate from the typical way we understand the brain to work. So, neurotypical is and I put this in big air quotes, everyday normal person. And I do emphasize, it's not that neurodivergent people aren't normal. It's just this is how we try to scientifically categorize and explain. Neurotypical people are people who think like the vast majority of other people. Neurodivergent people are those who have a different view of life. So for those of you who have had me in other classes and have gotten to know me, I have a nephew who is on the autism spectrum. He is a neurodivergent individual. And I know, and one thing that I little bit fear about is that if anything ever happened where police were called on him, especially now that he's a older teenager, I hope that the officers are properly trained, because he doesn't respond necessarily the intended quote correct way to engage with police officers. And it's because the way his brain processes that interaction, he responds differently. And so it might seem a little aggressive, and I don't want something to happen to him. So this is why I say neurodivergent individuals. This is a wide spectrum of people. Heck, even if you have diagnosed, like medical diagnosed depression and things like that, the way your brain works can be very different. So anyway, understanding that there are people who do not think the same way as the rest of general population is important to know, especially for policing, because if you are trained to do a certain job and respond a certain way every single time, and you have a standard, what happens when you engage with someone who doesn't respond the right way? Well, protocol dictates that you go, and if it seems to be escalating, you escalate as well, and to try to de-escalate. And that leads to problems. And that's why I say this is an important understanding of this. The big piece about the mentally ill definitely comes down to issues of schizophrenia and psychosis and things of that nature. Because while we outlawed a lot of the traditional mental health facilities where people with these types of disorders would be locked up, by getting rid of those things, we increased our homeless population, because a lot of those people didn't have somewhere to go and they became homeless. So dealing with the mentally ill, especially those with major psychological problems, this is a reality of modern policing. And so I want to say, regardless of whether it's mentally ill or neurodivergent, mental health is not a police problem. But mental health is a police problem. So notice I even have them as two different bullet points. It's because both statements are 100% true. So mental health is not a police problem. Mental health is a psychology, sociology, social work. It's a community problem. It's a thing that we need to work together across all different borders to try to work together and find a way to make things better, make them easier, make them more accepting and understanding and less stressful, and all these other pieces. Mental health is not a police problem. It's not just their duty. It is not the job of a police officer to deal with every single person who has a mental illness. That is completely misunderstanding and misrepresenting what a police officer needs to do. Yes, their duty is to the public and public safety, but dealing with the mentally ill or neurodivergent individuals or those who suffer from mental deficits, it's not their responsibility only. But because they work for the community, because their duty is for the good of the community, mental health is a police problem. Mental health is something that police officers need to deal with and need proper training in and need to work with. The flip side of this, and we'll talk about it in just a little bit, is that police culture itself and police officers, there is a history of mental health problems that develop, especially with traumatic and life-altering events. So, like, mental health is a police problem. It's something that police need to be actively involved and engaged with in developing better strategies and better ways to assist those who have it, as well as for their own. So it is a police problem, but again, like I said, it's a everyone problem. And I want to emphasize, I use problem to talk about its impact on the job, but I want to emphasize that mental illness and neurodivergent brains and disorders and things like that, they're not a problem. And not in the traditional sense that people would say it's a problem. Please note that if you are someone who has a mental disorder or mental health issue or whatever, you are not a problem. It's a part of us. It's part of who we are, and the problem is how our brains don't necessarily operate the same way or conform with the typical understood. And it's trying to find a way to get that message across and to get that to be understood. Yes, I am someone who is neurodivergent. I talk about it openly when people ask. I don't usually talk about it, but in this case, I have to. I am someone who is neurodivergent to a particular point, and this is one of those things that I also not only fear for my nephew, but I fear for myself. If I was engaged in a police situation, I don't know that I would necessarily handle myself totally correct because my brain doesn't work well in those situations, but that's neither here nor there. So the response to this and what our textbook talks about, but it's also important to understand that understanding the mentally ill and neurodivergent individuals and the way that mental health works, really the solution, there is a solution to this. It's just, it's not an easy solution. It takes time. And that's why I say it's not like it's not easy. Like it's a very clear steps, but it's a long process, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it really comes down to proper training about engagement with individuals. It's training your officers to learn, like, hey, if someone doesn't necessarily respond, if you are raised your voice and telling someone to get down on the ground, if they're not getting on the ground, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're resisting arrest. They might be someone who is neurodivergent, who might have a mental illness, who is not comprehending what you're saying or cannot physically do that, or there's a number of possible issues with that. So it's proper training about the best way to engage with them. It's also understanding that it's not always arrest. It's not always... It's sometimes a de-escalation thing. Sometimes it's just talking down someone. Sometimes it's just coming up to someone and having a conversation with them. I'm sure if you look them up online and on YouTube, you can find them, but there are several body cam footage of, and I've seen them myself, that's why I know that they're out there, of officers who are called out for public disturbances calls where someone is really uncomfortable because someone seems dangerous, and the officer comes out and it's an adult with a mental disability, whether it be a neurodivergent part like autism spectrum or something like Down syndrome or whatever that might be, but they have some kind of mental disorder that they are not in their right frame of mind, and an officer talks to them, and instead of arresting them, they just talk to them and they get them to calm down, and they find out who they are, where they need to be, all that stuff, and then they help them get home, or they help them find the person who's taking care of them, or who they're looking for, or whatever it might be. Truly, the point of understanding the mental health stuff is learning how to engage with them, learning that hostility and aggression is not always the correct method, and sometimes it takes a more gentle approach. But it's also understanding that in an emergency situation, there might need to be a level of aggression. And so it's understanding the nuance of it. And so that's why proper training about engagement is one of the key components of dealing with this unique population. The other thing is collaborating with services to help. This is working with mental hospitals, therapy programs, the local hospitals, whatever it might be, working with facilities and people who have services that can help. So police don't have to do it alone. If you remember, we've talked about this before, community of policing. community policing is the future of policing as we see it kind of now. It's been what we've been pushing for a while within the criminal justice system because it's one of those, number one, it's budget saving, but number two, it really is a more inclusive and a more complete way of addressing crime. When you work with other people, when you collaborate, when you don't spread yourself too thin, you work with others, you tend to address the bigger problems. So collaborating with services that are available, especially for mental health, that's a key component of this. But the other thing is specialized and or generalized training for officers or units. So notice there's an and or here. So there is a push for generalized and specialized, like generalized and specialized training for all officers across the board. Understanding, hey, these are some clear warning signs that someone is in mental distress. These are clear warning signs that an individual is suffering from a psychotic episode, or they're an individual who has schizophrenia and is currently in a manic state. Like, you have those specialized trainings, but you also have generalized training for understanding that mental health is something that is not always physical and it's difficult to assess. So it's these types of trainings, but it's also creating specialized units. That's why I said officers/units. Sometimes it's a matter of setting up a small unit. Maybe it's 1, 2, maybe 4 officers total who are specialized in dealing with people who suffer from certain mental illnesses. They've been trained in psychology. They've trained with professionals on particular things. They know how best to engage with those individuals. Those are the clear, easy ways to addressing this unique population within our larger community. And so it really is a matter of working towards this as a future. And so the big takeaway from this type of training stuff, because please note, I say proper training, specialized and generalized training, and collaborating. All of this comes down to one key part, and it comes down to what is the cause of the action, the reaction, or the response. That is what a lot of dealing with the mentally ill, neurodivergent, mentally disabled, whatever term that is being used in general, and also for any type of criminal, the understanding of what is causing the action, what is causing the reaction, what is causing the response. When you are analyzing what led to this response, that allows you to de-escalate a situation. And that's the goal, is de-escalation. And especially with the mentally ill and neurodivergent, you want to de-escalate. You don't want to make things worse. And so a lot of this really is rewiring traditional training. And we've talked about it a little bit before in this class already, but like traditional training where, there's police culture and you have ways that you engage and you talk someone down or you arrest someone. It's taking that traditional militarized training and going against that, kind of retraining yourself to approach it at a different way. So this is just one population. Obviously, it's a population that's near and dear to my heart, so I talk about it a lot, and I apologize if I seem more passionate or whatever it might be, but I am. What can I say? So another unique population that police officers have to deal with is juveniles and schools, and I want to emphasize, obviously, for more information and more detail about juveniles, there's a juvenile justice class. You take that class to get more of a in-depth analysis of juveniles, but here we are going to talk a little bit about some of the juvenile stuffs that are the juvenile police stuff that is unique, that is part of policing, that is a separate piece that I want to talk about here. And so one of the things is there's school resource officers and truancy officers, SROs. So really, these are the police officers who are in the school. Yes, they are police officers, but they're also more than just that. Usually they're specialized, trained to deal with these particular groups, but their job within the school is to act as the safety expert in law enforcement. So like they're obviously to ensure that the laws are being followed, that kids are being safe, and part of the whole concept of this is that, with an officer there, kids are less willing to commit a crime or do things that are illegal, as well as, be safer, is the general understanding. Whether you agree with that or not, but that's the general theory behind having a police officer in a school. Obviously, truancy as a truancy officer within a school is different than a school resource officer. A school resource officer is a police officer who's there all the time that does multiple roles, and those multiple roles are underneath it. It's the act as a safety expert in law enforcement, the liaison to community resources and educator, and I'll talk about those two in just a second. But truancy officers, yes, they're law enforcement and they act as safety expert, but their main goal is to make sure that students are attending school. Truancy is the illegal act of not being at school when you are under the age of 18. That's what it is, truancy. So truancy officers are officers who are there to make sure that kids are at school when they are supposed to be at school, because that is where they legally should be. And if they're not, oh boy. So that's a truancy officer, just in very broad terms. There's obviously way more to it, and there's more nuance. And yes, they also work as a liaison and they educate as well. But their focus is on students who are not there. School resource officers are there for everyone. They're the overseers of a lot of things. So as a liaison to community resources, they're the gap between the school and the broader community. Like, they're the weird bridging gap between where it's like, hey, the school asked for it, yeah, okay, but the police are asking for it, yeah, I kind of have to. Policing and school, I can't say no to it. But they are also a direct resource and a direct way to connect the general public, and I don't mean like the general public can just access a school, because that's not what that means, but it's the way of ensuring that the public knows that the school is safe, that the school is doing things that are in the best interest for their children. This is, metal detectors and understanding that there's no weapons at school and all those types of things. Their job is safety and to act as a liaison to community. Their third role is as educators. And this is something that's unique that I want to emphasize. And yes, I'm an educator, so I'm talking about it as a teacher. But when you work in a school, no matter what your job is, there is a level of educating that you do. You educate the people who are there in one way or another, and it's subtle a lot of times. So police, school resource officers, truancy officers, any officer who's in a school has a role as an educator. They're there to act as a model, as a guide for how you respond and how you behave. You engage with the students, especially when we're talking about middle school, high school. These are kids who are at a very crucial point in their lives as they're developing and they're changing. Positive impacts make a difference. Negative impacts make a difference. Educating people on the way that they should act, what's right, what's wrong, what's legal, what's illegal, how to engage with people, how to talk to people. Those are things that police officers do in the school setting. That's why I say at any level, even all the way in the college level. Here at EC3, if you go to any four-year institution, no matter what it is, if there's a person who works at the school, they are unintentionally teaching you something. Whether it's the way to engage with everyday people, whether it's how completely oblivious some people are, if it's, how to get answers answered, how to solve problems, how best to respond to someone who's scared or concerned or has questions. When you deal with people who are there to learn, you inherently teach a lot, so you have to be open to that kind of thing. It's a weird little sub thing. It's a sub thing within schooling as a general thing, but at every level, it's there. It gets more obvious the lower down you go. Anyway, So there are some unique things about juveniles and schools that clearly need to be discussed, and one of those is bullying. Not that bullying is something that only happens in schools, because let's be honest, we understand cyberbullying is a problem, and we understand that that's something that extends way into adulthood. Some people just never grow out of it, and it's unfortunate. But bullying is something that, while is not unique to schools and that it's everywhere, it's unique to schools in that it's a problem in schools that officers, that people can directly engage with. There have been several bullying programs that schools all over the country have tried and officers have tried, and we struggle with it. And I don't have an answer for why it doesn't work. The simple answer that some people would say is that people are just terrible and mean, and that's a fair response. But I don't know. I don't have the answer, and I'm telling you that now. But understand that bullying is a unique problem of the school system and of juveniles, and understanding that, how do you punish someone for bullying when it's not technically illegal? That's where we get into that weird gray area as police. So there is another component to this that I want to talk about, and that's the culture clash between school and the beat. And by the beat, I mean like a patrol. As a police officer, there is a very different culture within a school and out in the general public. In a school, they are juveniles, and they need to be treated with a very different approach than you would with an everyday person. And part of that's because they're still developing, they're still learning. And that's why I say the basic tenets of juvenile justice come in here. Juveniles are flawed beings who are growing and learning, and they don't have a guaranteed understanding of anything. So understanding that they need a little more leeway. You still need to be tough, but you need to be more flexible. That's a culture clash. And it really comes down to the ultimate question of this is, how do you balance harshness and care? How do you balance being very strict and straightforward with showing concern and not being too difficult, too rough with an individual? So dealing with juveniles is a unique situation. So shouldn't be that far of a stretch or difficult to think about, but obviously because you're dealing with lots of different people, it should be noted that a unique population is the different racial and ethnic backgrounds of people. I didn't say the unique populations were like one special group. No, it's way more complicated. So depending on the situation, depending on the community where the officer is, depending on numerous different factors, a unique population understanding is that there are going to be people that have different racial, ethnic, religious, whatever, different backgrounds to you, as well as other members of the community. This is one of those. Immigration is still a thing that is very much alive in the United States, as well as lots of other places around the world. Immigration happens. This means that there are people coming in from completely different cultures, completely different areas of the world. This changes everything. It's almost like taking a juvenile justice approach, but with a slight caveat. So, understanding, engaging, that's the word I want to use. Engaging with communities that are of different racial or ethnic backgrounds comes down to actually, really, I have them as the three first bullet points: understanding, deconstructing, and learning. And I'll talk about those each separately. It's achieved by training and community outreach. That's the overall solution. How do we get to there? It's training and community outreach. But engaging with different groups within a community, the different populations, the different groups and subgroups of people that you'll engage with, requires a couple unique things. And one of them is understanding language barriers. Regardless of how long someone has been within a community, there's always the chance of language barriers. Okay? And I want to emphasize, even to you, my students in this class, you might not have a language barrier between me and you, but another student might. Depending on any number of factors, there might be a language barrier. Sometimes it's a difference of Spanish and English, French, English, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Spanish, English, French, Italian, Ethiopian. It doesn't matter. The idea, and sometimes actually, there's a language barrier between English and English. It's understanding that sometimes language is problematic and confusing. If words are difficult or have multiple meanings, people might not understand. If people are coming from different areas, different regions, different places where another language or a variant of a language or a dialect might be prominent with actual its own lexicon or its own word choices and things like that, that's a language barrier that impacts people. African American Vernacular English, AAVE, it used to be known a while ago as Ebonics, not the most appropriate term, but that's a different language. Pidgin English, which is a term in sociolinguistics about the way that you take parts of English and native language and you make it work. Those are different languages. Those are language barriers. So understanding that people of different backgrounds might have language barriers is a key component for policing with engaging with different groups and of people, especially with different ethnic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. Their language barrier might be significant. They might not understand all the words that's being said. They might not understand all the nuance of it. They might know one definition, but not the 5 others that go with it. So understanding that there's a language barrier is key. Obviously, some of the answers are learning the language, but that's not necessarily the only way, and that's not necessarily it is kind of the best way, but it's difficult. But understanding language barriers means finding someone who can speak that language or working with that group to get to a neutral, generalized understanding of the concepts. It really is understanding that there might be a barrier so that you can overcome the barrier, so that you can work through the barrier. That's the goal. One of the other things with this is deconstructing fear, and I want to emphasize this. This is definitely important in our modern policing setting in our country now, but depending on your personal background, you might have had some kind of generational fear of police. It's something that happens even within the United States. It's not just something that comes from people who immigrate from other countries, which is something that needs to be understood. But for some people, there is an inherent fear of the police. And so a key component of engaging with different groups is understanding that there is going to be fear. And so you have to deconstruct the fear. So of police in general there's 2 real key things that our text talks about as far as fear, and that's of police in general and of deportation. I'll talk about that in just a second, but the general fear of police If it is someone who has immigrated from another country, depending on the country they came from, the police might not be a force of good, but it might be a military state. It might be something that works for a corrupt leader. And so police is not a positive thing for people, even though they come to the United States where the police are working for the general good of the community. It's understanding that they might have inherent trauma, or they might believe based off of their previous experience that there is to be a fear of the police. It's understanding that that's there and trying to work specifically to take away that, to work and deconstruct that fear so that you can work within that community. So really working with different ethnic groups and diverse groups is getting people to understand that you, as a group of people, as the police, if you are a police officer in this area, is you are there to help people, to help and protect. You're not there to hurt people. You're not there to arrest someone for saying, I believe in a different religion. No, you're there to protect people in need. And so it's a matter of, like I said, deconstructing that fear. The other component of this, and this is definitely true with immigration, especially regardless of your stance on illegal immigration or legal immigration, there is a serious issue with deportation. And whether someone was legally or illegally came into the country, I want to emphasize that. Regardless of if it's legal or illegal, there is a generalized fear of deportation because of a lack of clarity of who is who. Just because someone came here legally doesn't mean they can't be deported. It's a complicated matter. It's why there's a lot more to it than just, the simple answers. But I want to emphasize there is sometimes a fear of police because they're not sure who is police, who is immigration services, who is we have a lot of quote unquote military groups. We have a lot of policing groups. It's hard to tell the difference, especially if you're not from this country, if you're not from this area. It gets confusing. And so deconstructing the fear, understanding that, okay, well, we're not here for deportation. We're here to make sure that you're safe. There's a whole lot of nuance with that, especially in the Latinx, Latina community. And our book does talk about it, and it is one of those communities that really struggles with this. And that's why I emphasize this is what working with them means, is understanding that it's there and trying to work to fix that problem, to address what's really there, that needs to be there. And the third big piece with engaging with different racial and ethnic backgrounds is learning and working with cultural differences. And this can be religious too, but people are different. People have different responses, different ways of belief. Work with them. Community outreach. That's why I said the solution to these three, how do we get to those, is training and community outreach. Learning that there are differences in their culture is important. If a police department can understand that one community participates in a celebration at this time of year in this particular way, and it's not illegal, but some people feel uncomfortable about it, as the police, you understand that, okay, this is a cultural thing. How can I work with them to let them know, okay, can we do it slightly different so that these people of the rest of the community aren't feeling this way? It's a matter of learning a little bit about it and working with them, as well as working with the general community to say, hey, what they're doing is not illegal. Please feel free to engage with them to learn a little bit about. It's all that social aspect. It's that inter-community working. And I want to emphasize, we've talked about perception before, but perception is key. One bad apple can ruin a bunch, especially with groups of individuals who are already fearful of police. I want to emphasize this. Any group that is already fearful of police A bad apple will ruin the whole bunch. One bad officer in one department will make the entire police department seen as bad to that community. That perception is key. This is why proper training and community outreach is so important. So, a unique population, or rather a unique crime, and we've talked about it a little bit before, is cybercrime. Cybercrime is the most new, on the cutting edge piece of policing there is right now. And because of cybercrime, what is the unique population that's related to cybercrime? Well, depends. Who is it? It's understanding all of these nuances from before. It's understanding juveniles and the way that they respond. It's understanding people of different ethnic, religious, cultural, racial backgrounds. It's people with mental illnesses and mental deficits. Cybercrime is not limited to geographical space, and that's the problem. This is a unique population. This is a very unique situation because now you have everyone. It's not just the people who are normally in your community. It's everyone. So I don't really have much to say on cybercrime other than it's a matter of taking what we understand and know about the others and working towards building it together. And really the solution to all this, the understanding or the answer to all this is education. And I don't necessarily mean like traditional education where you go to school and you take classes, which obviously you're doing now, but it's training. Keeping police officers trained on important information and the ways that different groups work and how to engage, that's the answer. Cybercrime, because it deals with cyberspace and has to do with very unique things, it's also understanding technology. It's that simple. And so that was my little terrible segue into, so our textbook, the last chapter that I had you read for this class is talking about the 6 pillars of modern policing. And I wanted to emphasize this because I think it's a good way to kind of wrap up talking about the unique communities and the unique populations that policing deals with, but it also kind of brings together everything that we've talked about all the way up until this point. This is history. This is theories of punishment and crime. This is the duties of the police officer, what they do, what their roles are, careers that are possible. This is looking at, these are the 6 components of what modern policing is and what honestly the near future and hopefully the distant future for the most part of policing looks like. Because the answer is we've kind of figured it out. Yeah, there's nuance and there's things that we can improve on, but we've figured out what the key components of modern policing is. And so I listed them out here for you. And so number 1 is building trust and legitimacy. Like, this is what we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. Modern policing is really about getting the general population, the general community, to understand your role as protector, as guardian. And that's why I say adopt a guardian mindset. The traditional mindset of the police as military, as soldiers fighting the war against crime, that doesn't build trust or legitimacy to the general population. To the general population, a military at home is not great. A military abroad is what's more safe to some people. And so instead of being a military, let it be a security, a protection group. And so that's why building trust and legitimacy within a community is adopting a guardian mindset. You are there to help protect the community. One of the other pillars is policy and oversight. It's understanding that there are clear and comprehensive policies with similar values as the community. Within modern policing, the rules, the guidelines that police officers have to follow need to be very clear, need to cover several different situations, if not all situations possible, but they also need to align with the values of the community. If they are focused solely on something that the general community doesn't believe in, the police are not doing an effective job. Like I said, this is all about understanding our focus, modern policing, is more in that community aspect. Build trust and legitimacy. Create policies that are clear, comprehensive, and align with the values of the community. Technology and social media. This is playing into that last part that I was talking about. That's why I said it was a bad segue. But technology and social media. We are in the 21st century. We are moving very fast in this direction. We are in cyberspace way more often. Heck, this class is an online class. This is technology. So in policing, it's a clear understanding about technology and the use of technology. It's understanding how these things operate. And social media allows police and police departments to engage with the community in ways that previously might have been difficult. It's understanding the nuances of social media and technology, and understanding security, and understanding safety and privacy, and so many other things. But it's modern policing is knowing that the technology genie is out of the box, or out of the lamp. How do we work with it? Community policing and crime reduction. As I said, kind of a big focus of most modern policing now is community policing. Actively working with the community to be more efficient and to collaborate. Not just with everyday people, but with any department, any resource that's available in the community that could be helpful. Which, officer training and education, it's almost like I told you a little bit ago. Training and education, that's the key component to fixing these problems. And so even within the modern policing pillars, training and education, more specified training using community members with expertise to help train. It doesn't have to be a police officer that teaches someone how to talk to someone with schizophrenia. It can be someone who is a psychologist who can talk about these things. Specified training and using the resources you have to do that training. And last but certainly not least, and I want to emphasize this, officer safety and wellness. This is a component, a very important pillar of modern policing, and something that, as we've continued moving forward a little bit, we've adjusted and talked a little bit more about it. But officer safety and wellness is comprehensive care for officers in duty length, so like how long a shift can be, as well as situations of serious concern. Traditionally, there's been a generalized idea that in policing, if you are required to take some kind of leave due to a health reason or a situation reason, I'm kind of dancing around it. Officers who are in shootings, whether they've been shot or have been near shot or things of that situation, we have a lot of data that shows that there are psychological issues that come out from it. And so there's now more of a push than ever that officer safety and wellness is not just about their well-being while on the job. It's also that they're not returning to work before they're ready, that they're getting the help that they need, especially in relation to shootings, near shootings, situations like that. It's understanding that their mental health is important. They deal with mental health individuals, but they also are not immune to mental health. And so it's important to understand this kind of, one of those pillars is accepting this kind of stuff and saying, okay, we need to make sure that they are being taken care of and that they are not overexerting themselves or pushing themselves too far or coming back too early or whatever it might be. So those are the 6 pillars of modern policing: building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, officer training and education, and officer safety and wellness. That I will tell you right now, will be a question on the exam. Talk about the 6 pillars of modern policing. It'll probably be a short answer or an essay question. Plain and simple. But that's it. That's the last slide of the lecture. That's the last piece that I want to talk about. I want to thank you very much for tuning in, for listening to my lectures. I know sometimes I can be boring, sometimes I can be interesting, but this was Intro to Policing. Good luck on the exam, and I'll hopefully see you again.